There's a lot of myths about these walls. Have you ever thought about building one of these little beauties right here, a segmented wall? I'm Jeff. I got 35 years in building segmented retaining wall. That's what we're going to cover today, and we're going to get into it, and we're going to go from start to finish on everything you need to know so you fully understand and you're a pro by the end of this. So on any project that you need to do, the very first thing you've got to do is you got to figure out what your boundaries are and where you're going to be at. So basically what we've got to do is we've got to determine what section of the yard we want to work in and how you're going to lay this wall out. So after you get this all figured out, you've got to start working on your elevations, getting that, and then you got to get your utilities marked. That typically takes 2 to 3 days. So that's just one step that you just need to make sure you don't forget so you know what's out there. Because that sometimes it may end up moving your wall or moving your project around a little bit just to work around the utilities. So we've got that done. So we got our utilities marked. We've got everything kind of going our direction. Now, let's start talking about footings. This is something that you've got to make sure you can do. You can go through and cut this with a shovel. You could dig it with a backhoe. You can use a track hoe. You know, the bigger the job, the bigger the equipment you're going to end up more than likely with. Now, I've dug some small ones out of shovels, and then we've done some with track hoes. So anything you want to do, but after you dig, you need to ensure that you've got this compacted very solid, and you want to make sure that you don't have any type of loose soil or anything that's not compacted, because these walls, there's nothing that holds these walls up except the compaction of the gravel. So after you dig everything out and you get everything dug out, you get it cleaned up, ready to go, then you start bringing in your gravel. And so what you use is SP2 or rock dust, and basically you set it up and you start compacting it. Now you want to make sure that you do this in small lifts. The lift basically does not, depending on the size of equipment, but let's say that you're using a whacker packer or a walk behind packer of some type, a handheld unit, or even a packer that you're going to use with your hand. You don't want to go more than a couple, 3 inches on each lift to compact. If you put too much gravel down at once and then you try to compact it, you just can't do it, and you'll never get it completely compacted. So it's just going to be an issue. And then you're going to have a sag in your wall if you're not careful. So always just kind of go through and do it short, little, thin lifts. Go in, make sure that everything is good and packed, everything's good, then you can set your wall and you'll have a lot better result. Now, after you do this, after you get your compaction done, you get all that, then you want to set this up and try to get your drain to where it's basically good to go. And so basically what I'm saying is you set your block, you get everything done, then come back in with your gravel and take your gravel and run it around on the behind the wall, and you can set the grade to the block itself. So it gives you kind of a guide. So let's say if on one section here you need to go a 1/4 inch every 10 feet, you can have that kind of follow along on the back of your wall just to keep your drain to ensure that you've got that draining correct. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that you put the block in the subsoil to where it actually will hold the wall. And so basically it's 10% of whatever the wall height is. So let's say if you're going 10 feet, you need to stay about a foot. If you're going to be 5 feet, you can be 5 inches. But I typically will go and do a full block under the wall, and that will ensure that you have everything that'll hold up and you won't have any issues whatsoever. Okay, dead man, Geogrid. This is a super important part of any type of wall. Anytime that you go over 4 feet tall, you've got to have Geogrid, or a Geogrid. It's also called a dead man. A dead man is the old terms. When we used to build retaining walls out of wood, any of that type of stuff, you'd have a dead man and a beam that would go back into the wall that would make sure it didn't cantilever or fall over. Well, now we use Geogrid, and it's basically, it's laid parallel to the wall. So you pick a level, you put to the top of the block, you get that done, you put your Geogrid down, then you pin it, set your next block, and then that will make sure your wall won't flip. And so as the wall gets taller, they will actually have more Geogrid. Now, one thing that you could do is, depending on your fill, a gravel, if you're doing all gravel behind your wall and it's a clay wall, I did one time that was a clay wall. We were 10 feet tall and we only had to run our Geogrid 4 feet behind the wall because we filled it completely up with aggregate stone. And so basically it had no pressure on the wall, and so we just didn't have to run much Geogrid. But now in a parking lot situation where you've got a big area and moving lots of surface area, you may run your Geogrid. I've got one wall that's in a parking lot that's about 6 feet tall, but I've got 10 feet of Geogrid running back just for semis and all that to drive over the top of it. So every case has its own pros and cons, and you just kind of got to figure out what you want, or have an engineer come through and do a design to make sure you get it the way you want. All right, so I thought while I was sitting out here with the fire, that I would go ahead and talk about the last thing about retaining walls. The last thing that you really need to think about is cutting or splitting your retaining wall blocks. So basically there's 3 different ways that you can use it. One, you can use a chisel and basically break it around like this. The other way that you could do it is use a concrete saw and actually literally just cut the blocks. Or third, you could use a block splitter. And a block splitter is pretty cool. The nice thing about a block splitter is if you need to make a step in your wall or drop it in some elevation, you can actually break it so it gives you the rough texture just like the front of it. So a lot of times what you'll want to do is on your steps on your wall, you want to make the front and the side have the same texture. And so basically by hand chisel or a splitter, that'll give you that look. And it gives it a nice finished look. And you can also do that with the cap. So a lot of times what we'll do on the caps is we'll actually split those also to where they'll have a little bit of a hangover, but that gives you the rough texture. Now, a lot of times what you want to do in a cap situation, if you're cutting corners or something along those lines, what you want to do there is use a concrete saw and actually cut those to where it keeps it nice and smooth. And basically by keeping it smooth, then you can fit them however you want and you can make a shape. Most times, if you have a cut on a Versalock block wall, it's like 16 feet is what the radius is. So if you have a tighter radius than that, you'll need to cut it and adjust for that. But basically you want your caps to have a 1/2 inch overhang all the way around on the side. So if you're dropping your wall down to the next level, you want to make sure that you have your cap have a cantilever over it. And so by breaking that edge off flush with a splitter or a chisel, it'll actually make the edge of the block match the front. It just gives you a nice look. All right, so now finishing it off, what you want to basically do, whenever you're getting everything done, you've got all this, make sure you've got your water sloped away or dealt with on top of the wall, because that is one of the big issues that you could run into on one of these walls, is having the drainage on top of the surface drain. So like if you have a wall sloped down, coming down off the top of the wall, you want to make sure that you keep it sloped to where the water doesn't go over the top of the wall. You want to direct it down around a ditch down either side of it, just to steer it away from the bottom. Well guys, I sure appreciate it. Don't forget to like, subscribe. This has been great. I hope this helps some people. If you have any other questions, or if you want to go into more detail, we can get pretty detailed on these things if you wish. I just kind of grazed over the top, but guys, I sure appreciate it. See y'all next week.